Bom, então vamos à conferência de abertura. Eu queria apresentar o professor Shue, que é professor emérito de Relações Internacionais da Universidade de Oxford e pesquisador sênior e convidado emérito do Merton College, Oxford. O professor Shue é conhecido por defender prioridade dos direitos econômicos e sociais em relação aos direitos fundamentais, direitos civis e políticos. Trabalha com o tema da tortura desde 1978 e tem obras que constituem referências fundamentais para o estudo deste tema. Eu quero, em nome da Universidade de São Paulo, em nome do Núcleo Estudos da Violência, em nome dos nossos parceiros nesta empreitada, a ANDEP, a Cátedra da Unesco de Educação para os Direitos Humanos, Tolerância e Democracia, eu quero agradecer imensamente ao professor Shue por ter aceito este convite e nos proporcionar esta oportunidade de poder ouvi-lo e desfrutar da sua sabedoria e da sua reflexão sobre esses temas. Muito obrigado, professor Shue.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to be invited to participate in this conference at all, and a special honor to have sat on this panel with a distinguished poet, distinguished scholars, and men of action whose vision and courage and dedication have made real change in the lives of their people. I'm very grateful to the organizers for including me. I'm an American and proud to be one. Brazil and the United States are similar in many ways. The largest and most powerful country in South America, the largest and most powerful country in North America. Both lands of spectacular beauty, natural beauty, lands with diverse and beautiful people. The U.S. is still the most powerful nation in the world, but it's weaker since the terrorist attack of 9/11, 2001. Why is it weaker? Because of the wounds inflicted by terrorists? No, because of the wounds inflicted on itself in its response. It has allowed fear to overwhelm intelligence. It has lashed out instinctively, like a wounded animal, instead of using its brain. I'm talking specifically about the use of torture. People accept the use of torture because they accept the mythology that surrounds torture. George W. Bush was not smart enough to see through the mythology of torture. He fell for the mythology, and the U.S. is weaker as a result. But torture is supposed to intimidate your enemies. How can using torture make you weaker? Power has two components: force and respect. With military force, you can compel people to do what you want, whether they want it or not. When people respect you, they want to be like you. They want what you want. You don't have to force them to do what you want. They want to do it. When the U.S. was at the height of its power, it combined military power with respect and admiration. People admired the principles and values, some of which now have been betrayed. The President, George W. Bush, has foolishly thrown away the part of the power that depends on respect by tolerating the use of torture. This has brought shame and disgrace upon the U.S. and weakened its influence, and it's produced contempt for Bush. Comedians now joke that among the first 40 or so presidents, Bush ranks 50th. Torture survives on fear and myth. People are afraid, and so they accept the myths instead of being smart. So I'm not here to tell you that people in the United States are saints and people in Brazil are sinners, but I'm also not here to make you feel better about torture in Brazil. I'm here to join you in discussing torture everywhere, including the ongoing conversation about torture here. So I want to talk briefly about what I take to be the mythology of torture. In the next 2 days, the other distinguished guests who will be on following panels will be discussing the same points I will talk about in much greater depth, and of course, raising many more points. And I hope that you will be here. I want to say what I think is generally true. I'm not a student of Brazil, so you can tell me whether it's true here. Two of the great myths about torture are these. First, torture will be exceptional, a temporary measure, only while the emergency lasts. And second, torture will bring order. The intimidation inspired by torture will end violence and crime. What I want to do is try to explain why I think these myths are false. But first, let me just ask you whether they are false. Is torture a temporary, exceptional measure in Brazil? When did it begin? How long has it lasted? Has torture brought order? Is Brazilian society less violent now than it was before there was torture? Myth one. We're always told that torture will be rare. It will be needed only during the transition. It will go away when the emergency is over. But what is the emergency? Often it's said that we face exceptionally ruthless enemies. But decent people always face ruthless enemies. First it was fascists, then communists, then drug dealers, now terrorists. They're always dangerous enemies. If we need torture as long as we have enemies, we will need torture forever. For we will always have new enemies. The emergency is never over. Life is the emergency. When the emergency is over, we're dead. Torture is the ultimate shortcut. Instead of difficult and patient investigation, it offers quick and easy information. Torture can be a convenient shortcut for politicians because they don't need to find the money to pay police adequate salaries. They can let the underpaid police supplement their salaries through extortion. Torture seems easy, cheap, and quick. You don't need to provide expensive training for your police. Just turn them loose and see what they do. Like any entrenched illegal activity, torture is self-reinforcing. If I report your torture and get you into trouble, you'll report my torture and get me into trouble. So it's best for us to remain silent. Such conspiracies of silence are difficult to break. Someone would need to show great courage. Great courage is in short supply all over the world. Practices of torture generate a culture of torture. Torturers become a band of brothers. They understand each other and share the values internal to the community of torture. Some people are good at torture, and they are admired. Others are too soft or too brutal and are not admired. But the standards are shared. You have the same enemies and the same friends. You know who you are. Communities of torturers reproduce themselves. In some ways, they're like universities. The more experienced have learned useful lessons, which they pass on to the younger ones. There are rituals of initiation for the young and status for the old-timers. This is not the kind of enterprise that simply fades away. So I'm saying two things about the myth that torture is only transitional, only an exception until the emergency is over. One, if having frightening enemies means being in an emergency, emergencies are eternal. We're never completely secure. Second, even if somehow our enemies all destroyed themselves, communities of torture are self-perpetuating cultures with lives of their own. The identities of members of this community make reference to internal standards and internal norms. Abandoning the norms would mean abandoning their identities. This is radical, painful change, and it's unlikely to be spontaneous. People who want to make this kind of change need help. Myth number two. Torture may be nasty, but it will intimidate those who cannot be controlled any other way. Torture will bring order. I believe that some who use torture honestly want to bring order to a society that they believe is threatened. Certainly many who tolerate torture are afraid of disorder and are hoping that the torture will make them safer by intimidating the criminals. Earlier, members of the panel have already mentioned this point. But this road simply does not lead to that destination. I don't know of a country in which this has happened. If someone here does, I'd be glad to hear about it. Why does torture fail to bring order? It's partly a matter of short-term versus long-term. Intimidation of various kinds, including torture, can temporarily keep the lid on the kettle, but it does not put out the fire under the kettle. This is a further reason why torture would never end, even if it did work, because the fire has not been extinguished. It will always be necessary to hold down the lid, or the kettle will boil over. It's more importantly, however, a matter of what constitutes order, or at least any desirable kind of order. Torture has been illegal in Brazil for 20 years. Brazil has chosen the kind of order to which it aspires. Those who use torture, even those who use torture with the intention of resisting lawlessness, themselves participate in the very spirit of lawlessness that in their hearts they may oppose. Ordinary crime is illegal, and so must be kept hidden. But torture too is illegal, and torture too must be kept hidden. The torturer may hope to fight fire with fire, but he falls into the fire himself. He becomes part of the world that was originally his enemy. He must operate outside the law and in the dark. But this is the criminal world. He has not defeated it. He has joined it. The only route to order that can last and be stable is the rule of law and respect for rights. The torturer tells us, I can protect your rights by violating their rights. It may sound good, it may sound smart and tough, but it doesn't work. Rights are not protected better when rights are violated in order to protect rights. This simply weakens the rule of law by undermining legal processes and feeding the belief that what really works is lawlessness. The only way to strengthen the rule of law is to practice the rule of law. The rule of law grows stronger when it is exercised. If these myths are false, where does that leave us? First, change is possible. I grew up in the rural South in the United States. Many whites, like me, were afraid of people who were black and poor. To try to intimidate them, young black males were lynched, hanged after being castrated. One of the great American novels is called Strange Fruit. You look on the trees and you see strange fruit, the bodies of dead young black men. Many blacks migrated to major northern cities like Chicago. The police in Chicago became notorious for using torture on blacks. Now, a black man from Chicago, Barack Obama, is a serious candidate for President of the United States. And recently, a number of Chicago policemen have been tried for torture. So there's good news as well as bad news from the North. Some things change. How would you eliminate torture? The U.S. obviously hasn't done it, but I think it can be done. Solutions will have to be local, but it seems to me that three things are clear. One has to face facts. Torture does not bring order, it's not temporary, and it will not fade away on its own. President Bush says the United States does not torture, but this is a lie, and people laugh at Bush for this. In the U.S., we have an organization that helps people with the drinking problem. It's called Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't know if you have it here or not. At the beginning of every meeting, everyone must first admit that it has a problem. You have to say, "My name is Henry Shue, and I am an alcoholic." I think we need the equivalent for torture. We need to talk about Abu Ghraib in Chicago and about the places where torture occurs in Brazil. I think for the U.S., we could use a truth commission to talk about these things. It's not for an outsider to tell Brazil what it needs, but I would think a truth commission that looked at the history of torture in Brazil, past and present, might be a useful thing to think about. Second, one has to change incentives. Politicians have to stop trying to solve big problems with small budgets. If you want good policemen, you have to pay them, all of them, including the lowest ranks. People who torture and who tolerate torture have to be punished. Good police have to be promoted and rewarded. Third, one has to see that torture, besides being a failure and a crime, is an intolerable evil, incompatible with Christian ideas of the brotherhood of man and with the fundamental democratic ideal of equality. The relation of the torturer to the tortured is the most unequal imaginable human relationship. All power on one side, total vulnerability on the other. The torturer is the ultimate tyrant. The victim is utterly defenseless and at his mercy. Torturers come to believe their victims are contemptible, but it's the torturer who deserves contempt for arrogating to himself a degree of supremacy available only to God. Professor Vogt already presented you with a powerful poem. I hesitate to offer another one, but mine is by a recipient of the Nobel Prize, Polish poetess named Szymborska, so possibly it's worthy of also considering. I think it, in closing, beautifully communicates the fragility of the human body, which is our vulnerability to torture. It's called Tortures. It's in a collection of poems of Szymborska's called View with a Grain of Sand. Nothing has changed. The body is a reservoir of pain. It has to eat and breathe the air and sleep. It has thin skin, and the blood is just beneath it. It has a good supply of teeth and fingernails. Its bones can be broken. Its joints can be stretched. In tortures, all of this is considered. Nothing has changed. The body still trembles as it trembled before Rome was founded and after. In the 20th century, before and after Christ. Tortures are just what they were. Only the earth has shrunk, and whatever goes on sounds as if it's just a room away. Nothing has changed, except there are more people, and new offenses have sprung up beside the old ones. Real, make-believe, short-lived, and non-existent. But the cry with which the body answers for them was, is, and will be a cry of innocence in keeping with the age-old scale and pitch. Nothing has changed, except perhaps the manners, ceremonies, dances. The gesture of the hand shielding the head has nevertheless remained the same. The body writhes, jerks, and tugs, falls to the ground when shoved, pulls up its knees, bruises, swells, drools, and bleeds. Nothing has changed except the run of rivers, the shapes of forests, shores, deserts, and glaciers. The little soul roams among those landscapes, disappears, returns, draws near, moves away, evasive and a stranger to itself, now sure, now uncertain of its own existence. Whereas the body is and is and is and has nowhere to go. The torture victim has nowhere to go except to us.